I always thought the whole supernatural thing was just fiction until I had this experience. I swear on everything, it changed how I view the world. I was visiting my cousin for the weekend, a couple of hours away from where I live. My cousin has this old house, like the type you see in old school movies. Creaky floors, big wooden doors, the whole shiz. It used to belong to my aunt's grandmother, so it's been in the family for generations. I didn't think much of it at first. Old houses make weird noises, right? The first night I stayed there, everything seemed normal. We hung out, played some video games, caught up on life, nothing weird. It wasn't until the second night that things started to get strange. I was lying in bed in one of the guest rooms. It was a cozy little room, old-fashioned like the rest of the house. I was scrolling on my phone, about to fall asleep, when I heard something. It was faint, but it sounded like someone whispering. At first I thought it was the wind or something, but the windows were closed and there was no draft. I paused listening, but it stopped. I shrugged it off and went back to scrolling, but then, like 15 minutes later, I heard it again. It was louder, more distinct. It wasn't just random noise. It sounded like someone was actually whispering in the room. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I got freaked out. My first thought was that my cousin was messing with me, but when I texted him, he said he was already in bed. I decided to ignore it, turned over, and tried to fall asleep. But right as I started to drift off, I felt this sudden cold rush of air, like someone opened a freezer next to me. You know when you get that goosebumpy feeling and all the hair on your arms stands up? Yeah, that. And then, I swear, I felt a weight on the bed, like someone sat down at the edge. I froze. My heart started racing, but I was too scared to move or even open my eyes. I'm not proud of it, but I just laid there, stiff as a board, hoping it was all in my head. But that feeling of someone sitting there didn't go away. After what felt like an eternity, probably like 5 minutes, but who's counting, I finally mustered up the courage to open my eyes. Nothing. The room was empty. I laughed at myself, thinking I was being paranoid and imagining things. But the next morning at breakfast, I casually mentioned it to my cousin. I was trying to play it cool, not wanting to seem like I was freaked out or anything. He just stared at me for a second, then laughed it off, saying, "Oh yeah, that room's kinda weird." Excuse me, kinda weird? I pressed him, and he told me some half-baked story about how his grandma used to say the house had energies or whatever. He never really took it seriously though, so he never mentioned it before. Honestly, that made me feel worse. I thought maybe he was joking, but there was something about the way he said it. Like he wasn't fully convinced it was just a story. Later that day, we were in the living room, and I brought it up again, more seriously this time. He seemed hesitant, but he eventually admitted that he's had a couple of weird experiences in the house too, like hearing footsteps when no one's home or doors shutting on their own. He said he never felt like anything was dangerous, just unsettling. That didn't exactly make me feel better. I was already creeped out when the third night rolled around. I was determined to sleep through whatever weird vibes this house had, but man, it didn't give me a chance. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the floorboards creaking outside my room. It was soft, but it was definitely someone walking. I immediately thought it was my cousin getting up for a late-night snack or something, but when I listened closer, I realized it wasn't moving, like the steps were staying in one place, right outside my door. I don't know how to explain it, but I just had this overwhelming sense of dread, like something was wrong. I was about to get up and check when the door creaked open, on its own, and I swear to you, no cap, I saw a shadow of a figure peeking there in the doorway. I didn't even think. I just grabbed my phone and flashlight and pointed it at the door. The second the light hit it, the figure was gone. Just like that, poof, like it was never there. The door was still wide open, but nothing was in the hallway. I wanted to scream, but I also didn't want to wake up my cousin and have him think I was losing my mind. So I bolted out of the room and spent the rest of the night on the couch downstairs. The next morning, I told my cousin everything. He didn't laugh this time. In fact, he seemed more freaked out than I was. He said the same thing happened to him a couple of years ago, but he never told anyone because he didn't want people thinking he was crazy. He never saw the figure though, just heard the footsteps and the door opening. I left that day and haven't been back since. My cousin still lives there, and he says things have calmed down a bit. but every now and then he'll mention hearing something weird or feeling like someone's watching him. He's even thought about moving out, but the house has been in the family for so long, it feels wrong to leave. I don't know what I experienced, and I'm still not 100% on the whole ghost thing, but whatever that was, it was real enough to make me rethink everything I thought I knew. I wasn't going to share this, but I keep thinking about it, and I just need to know if anyone else has ever experienced something like this. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that paranormal stuff. Like, I've always been the one rolling my eyes at those haunted house shows and people sharing their supernatural experiences on YouTube and Reddit. But now, I don't even know anymore. I need to put this out there and see if anyone else has been through this, because it's low-key driving me crazy. Let me backtrack a bit. I moved into a new apartment a couple of months ago. It's my first place alone, and it's in a pretty normal neighborhood. The building is kind of old, but the rent was cheap and the location was perfect. Everything was going fine, until about 3 weeks ago. It started small. At first, I thought I was just forgetting things. I'd come home and notice random stuff wasn't where I'd left it. Like, my keys would be on the kitchen counter, when I swear I'd left them on the table. Or a book I'd been reading would be on the floor when I knew I'd put it on the nightstand. You know, little things like that. I figured maybe I was just being scatterbrained. Moving can be stressful, and I'm not the most organized person, so I let it slide. But then it got weirder. One night, I'm sitting on the couch watching Netflix, and I heard something fell from my bedroom. I jumped up, ran to check, and saw my laptop lying on the floor. I'd left it on the desk before I sat down, and there's no way it could have just slid off. I even checked to see if the desk was uneven or something, but nope, perfectly fine. At this point, I was annoyed, but I figured maybe I'd just put it too close to the edge and hadn't noticed. Then, a few nights later, I'm in the kitchen making dinner, and I hear this scraping sound coming from the living room. It sounded like someone was dragging one of the dining chairs across the floor. I froze for a second, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I poked my head around the corner, and sure enough, one of the chairs had moved. Like, actually moved. It was a good foot away from the table, and there was no way it had been like that before. I just stood there staring at it. My brain was doing all sorts of mental gymnastics, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation, but nothing made sense. The windows were closed, the fan wasn't on, and there was no breeze. Nothing. Still, I wasn't ready to call it paranormal. I figured maybe I bumped it and didn't notice. Whatever. But things escalated after that. A week later, I came home from work, and the first thing I noticed was that all the cabinet doors in my kitchen were open. Every single one. Not just cracked open, like fully wide open. I don't even remember using the cabinets that morning. And look, I'm not the tidiest person, but I'm not a complete mess. I close my cabinets, always. I walked around the apartment trying to figure out what the hell happened. At this point, I was starting to get that uneasy feeling in my gut, like maybe something wasn't right. But I still didn't want to admit that something was off. I mean, ghosts don't exist, right? There had to be a logical explanation. But then last night happened, and I'm legit out of ideas. So I'm in bed scrolling through my phone about to fall asleep when I hear this loud crash from the kitchen. My heart legit skipped a beat. I jumped out of bed and ran into the kitchen, and what do I see? My entire spice rack, like all of it, was scattered across the floor. Jars everywhere. It looked like someone had just swept the whole thing off the counter. But here's the thing. I was the only one there. No one else has a key, and I live on the 3rd floor, so it's not like someone could have just slipped in through a window. I stood there for a good minute, just staring at the mess, trying to process what the hell just happened. I checked to see if maybe the shelf had come loose, but nope. It was still securely attached to the wall. The rack didn't just fall. Something pushed it. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm starting to freak out. There's no one else in the apartment, and stuff keeps moving or getting knocked over without any explanation. I don't hear voices, I don't see any shadowy figures, none of that typical ghost stuff you hear about. But it's like something is here, messing with me, and I have no idea what to do. I haven't told anyone about it because, honestly, I don't know if they'll believe me. It sounds insane, even to me, and I'm the one living through it. But it's getting to the point where I'm starting to dread coming home. I can't relax because I'm constantly waiting for the next thing to move or fall or whatever the hell's happening. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? I don't know if it's a poltergeist or what, but I need advice. Like, how do you deal with this? Do I call a priest, an exorcist, a therapist? I just want to feel normal in my own place again. This is going to sound insane. I live with my best friend, let's call him Nick, for privacy reasons. We've been tight since middle school, and after college, we decided to move in together. We know each other's routines, we have similar interests, and most importantly, we respect each other's space. Nick is an early riser, while I'm more of a night owl, so we usually only see each other in the mornings or when we're both off work. About a week ago, things started getting weird. I came home from work late one night, around 11 p.m. Nick wasn't supposed to be home. He had a late shift at his job and wouldn't be back until well after midnight. So imagine my surprise when I walked into the living room and saw him sitting on the couch. He was staring at the TV, but the screen was off. No lights, no sound, nothing. Just him sitting there in the dark. I was like, "Yo, Nick, didn't you have work tonight?" No answer. He didn't even look at me. He just sat there, staring at the blank screen like he was in some kind of trance. I chalked it up to him being tired or something, so I didn't push it. I just grabbed a snack from the kitchen and headed to my room. But something about it felt off. Fast forward to the next morning. I got up to get some coffee, and Nick comes out of his room, stretching and yawning like he just woke up. I was like, "Dude, why were you just sitting in the dark last night?" And he looked at me like I was crazy. He goes, "What are you talking about?" I didn't get home until 1 a.m. I was working. I froze. "Nah, bro, you were sitting on the couch when I got home at 11. I saw you." He laughs, thinking I'm messing with him. I swear, man, I wasn't here. I was literally at work the whole time. I checked his work schedule later, and he wasn't lying. He had clocked out at 12:45 a.m. So, if Nick wasn't on the couch when I got home, who the hell was? That's when things started to get really messed up. The next day, I'm in my room, scrolling through Instagram, when I hear the front door open. I figured it was Nick getting back from his morning run, so I didn't think much of it. But then, not even 2 minutes later, I hear Nick's voice coming from the hallway saying, "Hey man, I'm heading out for a run. Be back in a bit." I jumped up and ran to the door, but by the time I got there, he was already gone. I looked out the window, and sure enough, I saw Nick jogging down the street. But if he had just left, who came through the door? I know what I heard. It wasn't just some noise or creak. I heard the front door open, and I felt someone walk past my room. But when I checked, there was no one there. That's when I started keeping tabs on Nick. Not like creepy stalker vibes or anything, but I started paying really close attention to him. And let me tell you, things got even weirder. There'd be times where I'd see Nick in 2 places at once. Like, one morning I was in the kitchen making breakfast, and I heard Nick in the bathroom, brushing his teeth. No big deal, right? Except, when I turned around, I saw him sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. Same clothes, same everything. I straight up asked him, "Weren't you just in the bathroom?" And he looked at me, super confused, and was like, "I've been sitting here for the last 10 minutes. I didn't say anything else, but my brain was going a mile a minute. I heard him in the bathroom. There's no mistaking that sound. But somehow he was in 2 places at once? It didn't make sense. Then, this was the last straw. I was in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard someone walking around the apartment. It was late, probably around 2 a.m., and Nick's usually asleep by midnight. I figured maybe he couldn't sleep, so I didn't think much of it. Until I heard the front door open. I immediately sat up, thinking Nick was leaving for some reason. I got up to check, and there he was, standing by the door, facing away from me, completely still. I called out, "Nick?" But he didn't move. Just stood there, not making a sound. I felt this cold chill crawl down my spine. Something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone to shine some light on him, and when I did, he was gone. I swear to God, he vanished. Like 1 second he was there, and the next, the doorway was empty. I freaked out, ran to his room, and found him passed out in bed, snoring. No way he could have gone from the front door to his room that fast. It was impossible. So now I'm here, typing this out because I legit don't know what's going on. I haven't told Nick yet because he'll think I've lost my mind. But I've seen something in this apartment that looks just like him. And it's not him. I don't know if it's a doppelganger I've read or if I'm losing my mind, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever it is, it's getting bolder. I'm starting to get scared to even be here alone. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Am I crazy? Or something actually pretending to be my roommate? This isn't my story, it's my grandpa's. He told it to me years ago. He doesn't like to talk about it much, but when he does, you can tell he's not exaggerating. Whatever happened that night, it really shook him. This was back in the late 60s. My grandpa was in his early 20s and lived in Hamilton, right on the edge of the Pine Barrens in South Jersey. If you've never been to the Pine Barrens, it's this huge, dense forest that stretches for miles. Super quiet, especially at night. No streetlights, no noise, just trees and darkness. One summer night, my grandpa and a few of his pals decided to go camping out near Batstow Village, deep in the Barrens. Batstow's this old historic village, but they weren't there for the history. They just wanted a place to drink some beers and hang out without getting bothered. No tents, just sleeping bags and a small fire. You know, typical young guy stuff. The night started out normal. They got the fire going, cracked open some beers, and were just shooting the breeze, laughing about nothing. But as the night went on, they started hearing these weird sounds. My grandpa described it as a distant scream, but not like an animal or a person. It was high-pitched, but distorted, like something wasn't quite right about it. Almost like it was trying to mimic a scream, but didn't really know how. His friends, being drunk and cocky, thought it was funny. They started howling back into the woods and trying to scare each other. My grandpa didn't find it funny, though. He grew up in that area, and even though he wasn't superstitious, he'd heard stories from old-timers. Stories about strange things in the pines. But he never really believed them until that night. The scream came again, but closer. Then the trees rustled. My grandpa said it was like something big was moving around, but not in a natural way. Deer are quiet. This wasn't quiet. It was heavy, like it didn't care who heard it. His friends started getting uneasy. Tim, one of his pals, grabbed a flashlight and pointed it into the woods. At first, they didn't see anything, just shadows and trees. But then Tim's hand started shaking and he let out this small gasp. He whispered, "What the hell is that?" My grandpa looked over and saw something standing just at the edge of the light. He swears it wasn't any animal he'd ever seen before. It was tall, way too tall to be a deer or a person, and its body was all wrong. Thin, like skeletal, but somehow big. He couldn't get a good look at its face because it stayed in the shadows. But he could see these two glowing eyes. Not like normal animal eyes reflecting light. These were glowing on their own, and they were too far apart, set higher up than they should have been. The thing stood there for a few seconds, just watching them. Then it took a step forward. My grandpa says that's when he felt this deep sense of dread, like his body was telling him to run. The thing let out this growling sound, like it was pissed off or deciding whether to come closer. That was enough for them. Tim dropped the flashlight, and they all took off, running back toward the road. They didn't stop to grab anything, just ran. My grandpa said he didn't even look back. When they finally got to the road, panting and out of breath, the woods behind them were silent. Not a single sound. No rustling, no footsteps, no screams. Just dead quiet. They got in the car and sped off without talking about it. They never went back to grab their stuff. My grandpa said he didn't want to know what that thing was or why it was there. They just knew they needed to get out. Years later, when I asked him what he thought it was, he didn't have an answer. He just said, "Some things in those woods, you don't need to understand. You just stay away from them." My grandpa isn't one to make stuff up, and the way he tells the story, it's like he's still trying to convince himself it was real. Whatever he and his friends saw out there that night, it wasn't something normal, and it wasn't something they wanted to see again.